Men don't get emotionally attached when they fall hard. They get attached when they stop wanting to run, and the moment that shift happens, 7 quiet changes begin long before he ever says a word. If this is changing how you see men and attachment, pause here and save this, or share it with someone who keeps mistaking intensity for commitment. Emotional attachment begins after consistency, not chemistry, because chemistry is immediate and exciting, but it doesn't require responsibility. Chemistry can happen with anyone, anywhere, and it often thrives on uncertainty and novelty. Consistency, on the other hand, demands choice. When a man becomes emotionally attached, it's not because the spark was strong in the beginning, but because showing up for you repeatedly starts to feel natural rather than optional. Attachment grows when presence becomes a pattern, not an event. In the early stages, chemistry creates motivation, but consistency creates meaning. A man may feel drawn to someone quickly, but that doesn't mean he's emotionally invested. Emotional attachment begins when he notices that his actions are aligning without effort. He reaches out because he wants to, not because he's trying to impress or maintain momentum. Communication stabilizes. Time together becomes regular. He no longer experiences showing up as something he has to remember to do. It becomes integrated into his daily rhythm. Consistency also creates emotional trust, which is essential for attachment. When his actions match over time, his nervous system starts to relax around you. He doesn't feel pressure to perform or uncertainty about where he stands. That sense of reliability allows emotions to deepen safely. Attachment requires this safety because without it, emotions remain guarded. Consistency proves that the connection isn't fleeting or conditional, which gives him permission to invest emotionally without fear of instability. Another important element is that consistency reflects self-selection. A man who is consistent is actively choosing the connection over distractions, convenience, or avoidance. This choice reinforces attachment internally. Each time he shows up, follows through, or prioritizes you, he strengthens the emotional bond not just for you, but for himself. His identity begins to include being someone who is present in this connection. Chemistry excites the mind, but consistency anchors the heart. It turns attraction into attachment by replacing unpredictability with dependability. Over time, the repetition of care, communication, and presence builds emotional weight. That's when attachment forms, not in the rush of feeling, but in the quiet reliability of consistent behavior that no longer feels like effort, but simply feels right. Men become emotionally attached when effort starts to feel natural rather than forced, because attachment isn't created through pressure or performance. It's created through alignment. In the beginning, effort often comes from intention and desire to impress. A man may plan, initiate, and pursue because he wants a certain outcome. But emotional attachment begins at the moment that effort stops feeling like work and starts feeling like self-expression. He's no longer doing things to maintain interest, he's doing them because that's how he now exists in the connection. When effort feels forced, it requires reminders, motivation, and energy management. He has to think about reaching out, making time, or showing up correctly. That kind of effort can fade quickly because it's sustained by willpower rather than emotion. But when a man becomes emotionally attached, his behavior becomes automatic. He doesn't debate whether to call or check in. He doesn't experience time with you as an interruption to his life. You become part of the structure of his day, not something he fits in when convenient. This shift is important because emotional attachment thrives on ease. The nervous system relaxes when effort feels natural. He stops bracing himself or managing impressions. Instead, he feels comfortable being consistent because it no longer drains him. In fact, not showing up would feel more uncomfortable than showing up. That's a key signal of attachment. Absence feels off, not presence. Natural effort also signals internal commitment. He's no longer motivated by excitement alone, but by emotional connection. He wants to invest because it feels good to invest, not because he's afraid of losing you or gaining approval. This makes his actions more stable and less reactive. He doesn't oscillate between intensity and withdrawal. When effort becomes natural, it means the connection has moved from external motivation to internal attachment. He's not pushing himself toward you, he's being pulled by genuine emotional emotional alignment. That's when attachment deepens because consistency is no longer a strategy, it's simply who he is with you. He becomes emotionally attached when he feels emotionally safe because attachment requires vulnerability, and vulnerability only happens where safety exists. Emotional safety means he doesn't feel judged, pressured, or evaluated every time he expresses himself. Instead, he feels accepted in his presence, even when he's unsure, imperfect, or still figuring things out. Without this safety, emotions stay guarded. With it, attachment has room to grow. Emotional safety is created through how conflict, silence, and honesty are handled. When a man feels that he can speak openly without being punished or misunderstood, he begins to relax emotionally. He doesn't have to filter every thought or brace himself for reaction. This allows him to show up more authentically, which deepens emotional connection. Attachment forms when he feels that being himself won't cost him the relationship. Safety also shows up in emotional regulation. When interactions feel calm rather than chaotic, his nervous system associates the connection with stability. He isn't walking on eggshells or managing emotional volatility. Instead, he experiences ease. That ease becomes attractive because it feels sustainable. Emotional attachment doesn't grow in environments of tension or unpredictability. It grows where emotions are allowed to exist without being weaponized. Another important aspect is that emotional safety removes performance. When he doesn't feel like he has to impress or constantly prove his worth, he can invest emotionally without fear of failure. He doesn't worry that one misstep will change how you see him. This lowers emotional defenses and allows genuine care to emerge. He starts sharing more, thinking more deeply about the connection, and considering your emotional experience as part of his own. Feeling emotionally safe also encourages emotional responsibility. He becomes more aware of how his actions affect you, not because he's anxious, but because he cares. He wants to preserve the emotional environment that feels good to him. That desire to protect emotional safety is a sign of attachment taking root. When a man feels safe enough to be real, consistent, and emotionally present, attachment forms naturally, without force or pressure, grounded in trust rather than fear. Curiosity turns into care before love is named because emotional attachment develops gradually through attention that deepens into responsibility. In the beginning, curiosity is light and exploratory. He asks questions, listens, and observes because he wants to understand you, not because he feels obligated to show up in a certain way. At this stage, interest is present but still flexible. Emotional attachment begins forming when that curiosity shifts from simply wanting to know you to wanting to treat you well based on what he learns. This transition happens quietly. He remembers details not to impress you, but because they start to matter to him. Your preferences, boundaries, and emotional patterns become information he uses to adjust his behavior. He notices what makes you comfortable, what drains you, what excites you, and what hurts you, and he begins acting with that awareness. That's where care enters. Care is curiosity with accountability. It's no longer just about discovery, it's about consideration. When curiosity turns into care, his mindset changes. He doesn't just ask how your day was out of interest, he asks because your day impacts how he feels. Your emotional state becomes relevant to him. If you're stressed, he notices. If you're quiet, he checks in. This doesn't come from anxiety or obligation, but from emotional inclusion. You're no longer external to his emotional world, you're part of it. Care also shows up in restraint. He becomes more thoughtful about what he says and does because he doesn't want to create unnecessary discomfort or distance. He anticipates outcomes instead of reacting impulsively. This is a sign that the connection has emotional weight for him. Curiosity alone doesn't regulate behavior. Care does. When a man cares, he's aware that his actions carry consequences beyond the moment. This stage often happens before love is verbalized because love is a label, while care is a behavior. Many people wait for words as proof, but emotional attachment is already forming when care becomes consistent. He's not just interested in who you are, he's invested in how you feel. That shift marks the beginning of emotional attachment, where attention transforms into responsibility and interest interest matures into something more grounded and lasting. He starts protecting the connection instinctively because emotional attachment creates an internal sense of value that doesn't need to be negotiated or announced. When a man becomes emotionally attached, the connection stops feeling casual and starts feeling meaningful, which changes how he moves through situations. He doesn't need reminders to be careful with the bond. His behavior begins to self-regulate because losing the connection would cost him something emotionally. This protection is subtle and often invisible, but it's one of the clearest signs that attachment has taken root. Instinctive protection shows up in how he avoids unnecessary risks. He becomes more mindful of his words, choices, and reactions, not because he's afraid, but because he wants to preserve what feels good and stable. He thinks twice before acting in ways that could introduce doubt, misunderstanding, or emotional distance. This might look like pausing before sending a message, choosing honesty over avoidance, or addressing small issues before they grow into larger ones. These behaviors aren't strategic, they're reflexive responses to emotional investment. He also begins protecting the connection in social contexts. He's careful about how he represents you and the relationship to others. He doesn't entertain situations that could undermine trust, even if you'd never know about them. This isn't about restriction or control, but about alignment. His actions reflect an internal boundary that prioritizes the emotional integrity of the bond over momentary validation or convenience. Protection also extends to emotional environments. He notices when tension is building and tries to stabilize rather than escalate. He becomes more open to listening, more willing to repair, and less interested in winning arguments. When attachment is present, conflict becomes something to navigate, not something to dominate. He wants resolution because disconnection feels uncomfortable, not because he's trying to be agreeable. What makes this instinctive protection meaningful is that it happens without external pressure. He's not protecting the connection because you asked him to, set rules, or demanded reassurance. He's doing it because the connection has become part of his emotional landscape. It matters to him in a way that doesn't require explanation. When a man starts acting in ways that quietly safeguard the bond, it's a sign that attachment is no longer conditional or exploratory. It's integrated into how he thinks, chooses, and shows up emotionally. His future thinking quietly includes you because emotional attachment shifts how a man organizes his life internally. At first, plans are individual and short-term, focused on immediate needs, goals, or convenience. When attachment develops, the future stops being a solo space. Without consciously deciding to, he begins factoring you into his thoughts about time, priorities, and direction. This doesn't show up as grand promises or dramatic conversations. It appears in small mental adjustments that reveal emotional inclusion. He starts thinking in terms of we before ever saying the word. When he considers his schedule, he naturally wonders how it aligns with yours. When opportunities arise, he weighs how they might affect the connection. This isn't about sacrifice or obligation, but about relevance. You matter enough that the future doesn't feel complete without accounting for you. Emotional attachment makes your presence feel stable enough to plan around, even if those plans are modest and undefined. This inclusion also shows up in continuity. He doesn't see the connection as something that exists only in the present moment. Instead, it feels ongoing. He expects you to still be there next week, next month, in upcoming moments of his life. That expectation creates emotional grounding. He behaves with more care because his actions now have implications for something he unconsciously sees extending forward. This is why attached behavior often feels calmer and more deliberate. Future thinking doesn't require certainty, but it does require trust. A man doesn't include someone in his future unless the connection feels emotionally safe and consistent. If the bond feels unstable or unpredictable, he keeps his future thinking separate. When attachment is present, separation no longer feels natural. He begins aligning his life in subtle ways, not because he's committing formally, but because emotional proximity makes separation feel artificial. This quiet inclusion is powerful because it isn't performative. He's not trying to reassure or impress you. In many cases, he may not even realize he's doing it, but his decisions begin to reflect continuity rather than contingency. He's no longer treating the connection as temporary or replaceable. Instead, it becomes part of the framework through which he views what comes next. When a man's future thinking starts making space for you without being prompted, it's a clear signal that emotional attachment has moved beyond the present and into something more rooted and enduring. He regulates his behavior to avoid losing you because emotional attachment introduces internal accountability. When a man is attached, his actions are no longer driven only by impulse or immediate emotion. Instead, there's a pause between feeling and acting. That pause exists because the connection has emotional weight. He knows, even subconsciously, that careless behavior could cost him something he values. This awareness doesn't come from fear of punishment or control, it comes from care. Behavioral regulation shows up in subtle restraint. He chooses his words more carefully. He considers tone, timing, and context. He doesn't react as quickly in moments of frustration or tension because he's aware that reactions have consequences. When attachment is present, emotional reactions are filtered through concern for the relationship. He doesn't want to introduce unnecessary damage or instability. This makes his behavior feel calmer and more intentional. He also becomes more reflective. After interactions, he may think about how things landed with you. If something fell off, he notices. If he senses distance, he wants to understand why. This reflection isn't self-criticism, it's emotional responsibility. He's invested enough to self-correct, to adjust, and to grow within the connection, rather than abandoning it when things feel imperfect. Regulation also applies to boundaries with others and with himself. He avoids situations that could create attachment shows in responsibility, not intensity, because intensity is emotional energy, while responsibility is emotional commitment. Intensity can feel powerful, exciting, and consuming, but it often exists without structure or accountability. A man can feel intense attraction, desire, or passion without being emotionally attached. Responsibility, however, requires follow-through. It reflects a willingness to be dependable, considerate, and emotionally present over time. When attachment forms, behavior becomes less dramatic and more grounded. Responsibility shows up in how he handles impact. He becomes aware that his actions affect you emotionally, and he takes that seriously. He doesn't disappear without explanation, create uncertainty through inconsistency, or leave emotional loose ends. If something needs to be addressed, he addresses it. If plans change, he communicates. This steadiness is not flashy, but it creates trust. Attachment values emotional stability more than excitement. Intensity often peaks and crashes. It can look like grand gestures, constant messaging, or overwhelming passion early on, followed by withdrawal or inconsistency. Responsibility doesn't operate on highs and lows. It maintains presence even when emotions are neutral. When a man is emotionally attached, he doesn't rely on feeling in the mood to show up. He shows up because he understands his role in maintaining the connection. Responsibility also includes emotional containment. He doesn't offload confusion, stress, or insecurity onto you. Instead, he manages his internal world so that the relationship doesn't become a source of chaos. This regulation makes the connection feel safe rather than consuming. You don't feel like you're riding emotional waves. You feel grounded. What makes responsibility such a strong indicator of attachment is that it reflects choice. Intensity can be accidental. Responsibility is deliberate. It means he's choosing to care, to be consistent, and to protect the emotional environment you share. When attachment is present, the relationship doesn't feel urgent or volatile. It feels steady, intentional, and reliable. That steadiness is what allows emotional attachment to deepen and endure, because it's built on commitment to care rather than the rush of feeling. 8. Confusion, mistrust, or emotional distance. He doesn't put himself in positions that threaten the connection, even if they offer short-term gratification. This isn't about restriction, it's about prioritization. When attached, the relationship becomes more valuable than temporary validation or impulse. What makes this regulation meaningful is that it's self-initiated. He isn't changing because he's being watched or managed. He's changing because the emotional bond has become part of how he defines himself in the relationship. His behavior aligns with his values, because losing alignment would mean losing you. When a man begins to consistently regulate himself in order to protect the connection, it's a sign that attachment is no longer surface level. It's integrated into his emotional decision-making, shaping how he speaks, acts, and shows up in ways that feel steady rather than reactive.